Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, everyone in between, Jason, welcome back to another tier list. Let's go tier list. Yes, so there was a whole bunch of new cards released. We're in a brand new format, so that means I have to start making some tier lists. I can't exactly say what the top decks are right now, so what I'd rather talk about is what we should be playing to beat the top decks. Because we already know the two decks to beat are Gaia and Dragons. Unfortunately, Gaia and Dragons are in fact the decks we must be trying so hard to beat. So what I have in front of me here today is a concise list of pretty much all the non-engine we might be playing. There's probably some other non-engine generic cards that out there that I just haven't really included, but if I missed any, you can leave those in the comments. We can talk about it down there. I kind of just want to break it down and say, okay, here's all the quote-unquote non-engine cards that we put in like most decks. You know, most decks will have some variation of these cards in it, and we should talk about, you know, which of these are actually the best to be playing against the meta. Now, you'll notice if you're familiar with my channel, I don't usually do the classic S, A, B, C, D tier list, but because we're trying to beat the meta decks, I am going to use it this time. Basically, it just means S tier is cards you really want to see against the meta, and D tier is cards that won't do a thing for you against the meta. And there are some other cards in here as well that will get ranked based on if they're just good to include for the current format overall, even if it's not specifically good against Dragons or Gaia. Alright, so to start off, I'm actually going to start with a monster. We're going to start with Rising Light Angel Essel. Now, Essel's are always been this little fluctuation in terms of being playable. A lot of skills lock you out of even playing her in the first place, but she's actually seen a bit of a resurgence as being good in pure Gaia. So I'm gonna put Essel up in the A tier in terms of staple cards we could be playing. She's not great in the pure Gaia deck, but she is pretty good overall. The other issue with her is actually if you're using it against the Gaia deck, you might end up setting up their grave for them, which could be really bad. But at the same time, you might be milling cards from them that they really need. And then of course, if you are playing Gaia, Essel, mill, hit like Curse of Dragon while you have the new Gaia guy in hand is insane. It's sicko mode. That's why they included her in that structure they gave everyone. So it is pretty good. Next up is Card Restoration. I'm going to put Card Restoration in C tier. Obviously, this card's always been just okay. It's a card I've really loved for a long time, and I was kind of including one of it in my decks just to have like an extra trap card that isn't as restrictive as the other ones. But with the current way that the meta decks kind of play through this one specifically, I'm definitely putting it on a very low tier. Gaia, specifically Gaia Hero, will literally just pop this, and then Dragons will literally kill you through this. There's no HP you can gain from Card Restoration if you're playing dudes in attack position against the Dragon deck. There's no way for you to survive. Next up, Tribute to the Doomed. I put Tribute in B tier. So Tribute's interesting. It is nice to have 1-for-1 removal, well, 2-for-1 removal against an opponent's monster, but the issue is that the classic Gaia Hero end board, if they manage to not kill you, is 3 monsters. 3 big must-answer monsters. This is pretty good against the Dragon deck. If they turbo into a big swing with a Miragia Star F, this is pretty nice to just remove it from the field, but it's not perfect against both decks, which is why I'm giving it a B tier rating. Next up is Widespread. I'm also going to put Widespread in B. It's a card that's pretty easy for those decks to play around. Like I said before, Gaia Hero does just pop like your entire back row. But the real issue with Widespread is that it's just not as crazy impactful, and there are like ways to just play like around it. A lot of decks do gain trap destruction immunity for their bigger guys, which is really rough for this card. It really hurts Widespread's usability. The thing with it though is it's also worse right now because people are trying out decks like the new Earth Machine stuff, the new Light Galaxy stuff, which do also grant immunity to trap destructions. It's really rough. It's in a very rough spot, but there is a different legend card you should probably be playing in your deck if you can't play Negate Attack. Let's just say that. Next up, Card Revitalization. I'm just gonna toss that in D tier. It's not perfect. It could be really good as like a, so the thing with, okay, I was trying to say it could be good in like a Gaia deck as a one of, but if you're in like a Gaia mirror match, your opponent's probably going to end only with one card in hand if they're going first, or even if we're on like turns 3 or 4. So it really isn't that impactful. It's fine in a deck like Thunder, obviously. Thunder really likes this card, but it's just not that good against decks that are emptying their entire hand like the current meta ones are. You know, dragons are spending all their materials to all go into one big guy, and then Gaia is just crapping out all their materials to go into a big board of guys, you know. That's why it's a rough spot. Next up, Rhythmical Reformer. I'm giving her B tier. She's just a good classic draw card if your deck doesn't have like its own. She's also nice to combo along with Essel to mill things, and oh, if you miss and you only hit monsters, that's fine. It could just end up giving you a better trigger for Essel. She's a really good go for going second, let's be real, but she isn't perfect. And the other issue that puts her in B tier instead of like something like A, where she would be on the same tier as Essel, is that she's not as good in the meta decks. So she's not great against them, and she's not that good in them, but she is like a nice little rogue tier option, or for those lower tier decks to play. Rivalry, this card is really bad. I'm just going to throw it back down into D tier. It will always be the bottom tier as long as it's included on these lists. Monster Reincarnation, though, however, is an interesting card. I'm putting it to C tier. I'm putting it to C tier because there's literally only one deck that wants to play this card right now, and that's Metarion. But even then, some people are foregoing the Restoration and the Reincarnation and are instead playing Gaia Metarion, Hero Metarion, or other kind of like mixed decks like that, where they instead play something like Poly as their legend spell. So Reincarnation itself is already just kind of falling off. It's only used in one deck, and that one deck is becoming like a secondary engine in a better deck. You know? Call of the Earthbound here. This is an interesting card. I'm putting it in C tier right now just because this requires you to be playing a deck where its effect, you know, is relevant. So the problem is we're not the good decks that put out a lot of big guys that you would want to use this card to redirect attacks are the meta decks. It is Gaia Hero, like specifically, that would be pretty good with this card, being able to redirect an attack from your smaller, like maybe your Gaia fusions are still at their normal 2600s. So you redirect the attack to your 3100 hero guy. That could be pretty nice. But outside of that, it's not too great. And it is also a limit 3 card. So that could end up like conflicting with your other limit 3s if you're playing a version that runs them. Because I know there's like a purer Gaia version that's running Secret Order, so this would conflict with that. I keep bringing up Gaia Hero specifically because that's the version of the deck I think is the most powerful. So a little addition in this like middle part of the video. When I'm talking about Gaia as a meta deck, I am talking about Gaia Hero specifically. Okay, Ghost Cyclone's actually pretty good. Going second could not be better right now, and for a deck that isn't playing like the Gaia stuff, you would probably want to run Ghost Cyclone. Of course, if it's not conflicting with any other limit 3s, you would want to play Ghost Cyclone just because being able to snipe out their back row, get yourself a bunch of advantage to do a really big swing is really nice. This also works really well against Gaia if you manage to actually get them to go first instead of yourself. And if you're playing a deck like Pure Hero, it works really well there. I do like the Pure Hero attack with the new cards running triple Ghost Cycle. It's pretty nice. The going second OTK is really, really nice. Siesta Torero. I'm actually going to put Siesta Torero up in A tier. 1, his recycling effect's really good. And 2, booking the Gaia end board guys is pretty nice. They don't need to be put face up for any specific reason besides, you know, their attack stats. So putting them face down lets you out them much easier because they have weaker defenses. Also, this would help using Torero to out big guys in like let's say the Dragon deck would also be nice because of things like Miragia Star, because of things like Dragon's Fortitude would, you know, be less effective if you're not clashing with a big 3k guy, if you're instead clashing with, you know, their 2k or something defense. Pot of Avarice. I'm putting Pot of Avarice down in the B tier. It's just not too great right now. We exist in a world with Pot of Greed, and Pot of Greed is pretty much better. I personally prefer overplaying Avarice to play one Pot of Greed and one Talismanic Steelite. I just think they work out much nicer in a combination than playing the one Avarice. Because if Avarice is in your opening hand, you set it, it gets popped, you just lose it forever. If Pot of Greed is in your opening hand, you use it immediately, and then you have much better options. Alright, next up we got King's Majesty. This card, basically kind of similar to Call of the Earthbound, but a little bit worse. So I'm going to put them on the same tier. This does require you to play a level 1 Fiend type in your deck to even use in the first place. Like, yes, it is a very powerful card, being just essentially another card that just 1-for-1 negates an attack, but it requires the Fiend, and it's a limit 3 card. So that kind of stifles its usefulness. Next up, Bulgecorn. Bulgecorn, put it in the C tier. Bulgecorn's not bad. It's seen a lot more use in the previous format, but the problem now is that so many of the best decks just have Spell Trap Destruction built into their monsters, you know, like Hero, like Gaia, and they couldn't even really play this guy anyway, so his stock gets much lower. You really don't have to worry about back row too much against those decks, against like a Gaia, against like a Dragon deck. So Bulgecorn's stock is really low right now. Of course, there's a lot of decks that do like to play him as a one-of, but I'm just not that into him. I've never been that into him. Anyway, Negate Attack, S tier. If you manage to get this to like live on your field, you just win. You're just win combat, and it's so important to win combat now. You gotta set Negate Attack. You just gotta pray. You just gotta pray that they don't hit it. Like I do every day. I pray. I'm like, please don't hit the Negate Attack. Come on. Next up is an interesting card. So this is Combustion Crisis. I'm putting in A tier for right now, but let me be very clear. Let me read this card to you, okay? Well, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, inflicts such 600 damage to your opponent. Then, if your opponent has 2 or more face level 7 monsters on their field, you can shuffle 1 monster from your opponent's field into the deck. This is really good against Gaia. This is really good against Gaia. This is burn for 600 against any other deck in the game. Okay? A lot of people are playing this as a nice tech card to take on Gaia, but keep in mind, this card is probably going to be dead against 90% of the other decks in the game. Okay? It's good against Gaia, which is why it's an A tier, but it is nothing. It is nothing against any other deck, okay? So yes, it is good. Yes, it does make sense to play it now, but it's just bad against any other deck but Gaia. Ancient Gear Golem, put him in B tier. Previously, I would have said Ancient Gear Golem's like an S tier. Like, he's insane, he's crazy, he's cracked. Gaia outs Ancient Gear Golem very easily. Gaia Hero outs it even easier, okay? So, while Gear Golem is still really great, he is also really bad into dragons. Miragia Star just OTKs you right over his head. So, while yes, he is super good against every non-meta deck, when you actually face off against the meta, he really falls off. Now we got the Guard. This is another interesting card. So it's fine. It just stops any direct attack. But the problem is, if you're facing against a meta deck, you're probably getting attacked directly because your back row is gone. Also, let's talk dragons. They do not care. They do not care about your monsters. Miragia Star F is OTKing you over your monsters, and that's the problem. Musical Princess, I'm putting Musical Princess in A tier. It is a pretty nice disruption. So just being like, they smack you down to just one monster and just going, cool, negate. Sometimes if this does kind of rely on the opponent to miss-sequence, right? But when it does resolve, pretty nice. That's why I'm putting it in A tier. Also, this is probably going to be a much more represented staple, because if you're not familiar, they did give out copies of Musical Princess with the new Gaia deck just for free. So a lot of people are going to have these, especially at the lower tiers. So you should be aware Musical Princess is probably going to show up a whole lot more. All Seeing Harvey, gonna put her in C tier. As always, Harvey and Torero are actually a pretty decent combo, being able to out a lot of monsters just with the two of them. But the issue comes with you're not going to always see them at the same time. You're not always going to even want to play both of them in the same deck. She's basically like a bad jam check, really. She can either peep any back row or, you know, 2-card combo out a bigger monster. She's just not too great, especially with the current meta. Pure Gaia can play her. In Pure Gaia, let's talk about Pure Gaia for a second. Torero Harvey is a really nice package in Pure Gaia, and I've seen a lot of people actually playing it. Next up, Trap Hole. Now, Trap Hole. I am putting Trap Hole in S tier. This right now, for me, if you cannot play Negate Attack in your deck, you should probably play Trap, because we are trying to kill. We are trying to kill dragons and Gaia, and both those decks tribute summon their big important fusion material monster, who definitely fulfills the requirement to be popped by Trap. Much nicer to get it immediately than hoping to save yourself for a widespread to resolve on an opponent's attack. Next up, Heavenly Bliss. I'm gonna put it in the D tier. Honestly, it's not as bad as the other two cards in the D tier, but the issue with it is just it needs to survive into the battle phase where one of your monsters is destroyed, and then it's just like a Book of Moon. That's whatever. If you want to play Book of Moon, play Book of Moon on legs or here in Torero. Bliss just doesn't really do much that's very important for us, let's be real. Next up, Dragon's Fortitude. So there are a bunch of generic like decks that can just play dragon things. I know I saw people playing around with this in versions of Gaia on release day. It's not too great, which is why I'm just going to put it down here in the C tier, which is getting pretty big by this point. But the thing with it is that it's so if you're playing dragons, you're obviously going to play this card, right? But it's just not great. Next up is Monster Calling. This is a new card added with the newest box. This isn't as generically usable as a lot of the other cards on this list, but it has been a decent option for Pure Gaia and Dark Magician, which is a deck I love. Just being essentially a copy 3, 4, 5 of Secret Order for those decks. Obviously, all it does get is you the +1 on the draw, but it's not even that good in the Gaia deck, let's be real. You'd rather play Secret Order in the Gaia deck, let's be real. Like, yeah, it can also summon Curse of Dragon, but brother, that's just fine. That's just. Next up, we got the Barrier. This is going to be representing the Barrier and the Barrier-like cards. Honestly, let's just windmill slam it into. All these cards are just fine. Again, these cards do need to survive, but in the mirror matches, they're also bad. They're bad in the mirror match. Those kind of cards are bad in the mirror matches, specifically because usually in the mirror matches, you're not exactly going 1-for-1 crashing, and let's be real, if the opponent's swinging into you, you probably don't have any back row, and they probably have way more than 400 or 500 attack over you. So, Shield and Sword, nah, it's still not time for Shield and Sword. There are some decks that could just like OTK with the Shield and Sword, but in a game where Pot of Greed exists and where Poly is mandatory for some of the top decks, I wouldn't be telling you to play Shield and Sword. Now, next up, I can't believe I'm going to do this. I cannot believe everyone who's watching this video and has not watched any of my other tier lists is not going to believe this. It's not going to believe, like, I would even think this card's bad. I used to think this card was the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. I used to think this card was so ass, it would go immediately in the bottom tier of every list I did. I am putting Forever Freeze in S tier. Why? Because it's just another copy of Trap Hole, basically. It just instant kills the big normal summons for Gaia and dragons, and it's so good against it. I was already on the Forever Freeze train last format when we were only worried about dragons, but then we added Gaia to the mix, and oh my god, it's won me games on the spot. And I think you should be including your copy of Forever Freeze in every deck you play. Okay, next up, Pierce. I'm actually putting Pierce in A tier just because I've kind of been convinced on Pierce, right? Because there have been some tournament results where the player played Pierce. The people I saw playing were playing it as a one of. I'm like, huh. Let's say you're playing like pure hero, and you go, cool. Flame Wingman, boost him to 31, swing into a defense position guy. He pierces over, and then he burns when you activate Pierce, also targeting him. Think about that. Or you go, you target the new Burst Wingman, and yeah, he boosts him to the 31, pops up back row, and then pierces over the enemy. This is also good in the Sea Serpent deck, just because that deck doesn't really have anything to stop defense position monsters from just walling it. Alright, now a card that's completely fallen off, Rice Terrace. I'm gonna put it in B tier. It is still good against some decks, but it's not good against Gaia. It's not good against dragons. It's good against pure Gaia if they're playing the Secret Order version, or if they're playing the version that's on Monster Calling. It's not good against Gaia Hero, which is the deck I care about. Alright, then finally, the two cards I actually forgot to put on this list, and I don't know if you saw the jump cut where I added them to the list, Pot of Greed and Talismanic Seal Ray. These are near mandatory one-offs that you should have in every single deck you play. The only excuse to not play Pot of Greed is if you are playing a deck that is forced to play a different legend spell. And then Talismanic Seal Ray, I like this called the government mandated one-of. It's such a nice card. It's really good recursion, and it could just win you the game on the spot sometime. So, this is the list. Now, like I said at the top, if there is a card you think I left off this list, leave them in the comments below. I'm trying to get this done quickly to get it to you guys as soon as possible. So, like I said, comments down below if I forgot a card. As well, while you're down there, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and all that other good stuff. I do a Mass Kiss series, I got highlights every week, and this Friday is the return of the Rush Rundown. It's been a little sporadic here, the Rush Rundown releases, just because I didn't have any good decks that could really be featured. But with this upcoming Friday, we are so back. Thank you to everyone who watched. Goodbye.